The Soviet KV-2 is a bit of a meme tank due to its appearance, firepower, and heavy armor. Yet the question arises, why was this tank built in the first place? For this I interview Peter Samsonov, also known as Tank Archives, who looks into Soviet sources of the time. He recently published a book with us about the IS-2, which you can get here or on Amazon. We also look at the question if it was really a problem to turn the turret of the KV-2 and some other questions as well. Now, you all know the KV-2. It's kind of a meme tank. Most people really like it. I personally really love it. So the question is, why the KV-2? I mean, it's basically a house on wheels with a big, huge gun. So what was the reason for this? Why build this?
Well, in 1939, as we all know, the USSR invaded Finland. And the idea was that, the oppressed proletariat of the Finnish nation, once they see their liberators arriving, will rise up, depose their capitalist overlords, and, we all live happily ever after with the, whatever they wanted to call it, Finno-Karelian Soviet Republic. For some reason, the workers and peasants of Finland were reluctant to be liberated. And they also built a big line of fortifications to prevent the aforementioned liberation. And so the Red Army didn't really have any breakthrough assets. Like they had T-30, T-35 tanks, didn't participate in the Winter War, but they had T-28s. The T-28s have a 76 millimeter gun, fairly short gun, that all it can really deal with is like earthworks and very minor field fortifications and not concrete bunkers. So the Red Army was kind of, hit its face against the wall that they weren't expecting. And they needed breakthrough assets, right? Something with a big gun that could actually punch through a pillbox. Then there were some projects like the Su-14 in the interbellum period that didn't really go anywhere. All you really had was prototypes, and they were open-topped SPGs that they weren't bunker busters. They weren't capable of direct fire. And so the requirement was we need a tank with a large gun, not even high velocity, to deliver tons of explosives. And it needs to be fully armored. And we needed it yesterday. And so the solution was this, the KV-2. And as you can see, massive, absolutely massive turret on the same size regular KV turret ring. Big gun sticking out the front. You kind of see, I can't really see the breech. But anyway, huge turret. It needs to be this big because the gun needs to elevate in the press, and the breech for a 152 millimeter gun is quite large, and obviously, bigger the gun, bigger the ammunition, the more space in the turret you need to work with it. But that's all they had. So they grabbed the big boxy turret, slapped it on top of a KV-1 chassis, and said, "All right, there you go. We put 152 millimeter M10 howitzer. That's as big as a gun as we could fit in here. It'll have to do." The Mannerheim line had already been taken by then, so the KV-2 didn't really participate in that breakthrough action. But it did participate in some anti-bunker warfare. And the result was disappointment, because the Red Army from the very beginning was not satisfied with the M10. The gun that they really wanted to have in the KV chassis was the BR2. So the full-length gun as opposed to a howitzer.
Okay.
Yeah, they had some good weed maybe that they were growing at their daches, but that's what they wanted. High velocity, right? Because concrete penetration doesn't just depend on how much explosives you can deliver, but also on the velocity of the shell. And so the KV-2 was a very special, like it was built for this very specific set of requirements, one of which was we need this tank right now, but only 4 were completed during the Winter War. And then throughout, between 1940 and 1941, it was built in small batches, short bursts. There were like fewer than 200 of them. I can't remember the exact number right now. but production was scheduled to end in June of 1941. So regardless, even if the war hadn't broken out, even the Germans hadn't invaded, it would still have been taken out of production. And there was no next generation breakthrough tank with a 152 millimeter howitzer. The next generation breakthrough tank would have been the 212. I think in World of Tanks it's called 212A. They've got that BR2 gun into a KV-3, a casemate in the KV-3 chassis, not a turret. But that's what the Red Army wanted.
Did they put this gun in the Su-152, or which gun did that receive?
That was the ML 152 millimeter ML20. That's a gun howitzer. It had lower velocity. They did try to fit a BR2, not just a BR2. There were projects to fit a B4 2 or 3 millimeter howitzer on the KV1 chassis in a casemate, not in a turret, thankfully. But there is called the Index the U19, I think it was. And preliminary calculations showed that the resulting vehicle would have weighed 66 tons. That's not including the Supermen you would have to put it in the crew that would be able to load a shell that weighs 100 kilograms. But the driver would also have to have been some kind of Superman and the mechanic as well, because experience showed that any tank on the KV chassis that weighs more than 50 tons is not going to drive very far. 48, 49-ish was the most you could get out of it. So there was a letter, I think I've translated it. It's on my blog somewhere. The designer just straight up says, what you want can't be done. We can't give you this gun on the KV-1 chassis in a fully armored casemate, 75 millimeters thick, in under 50 tons. Can't be done. So
it was not for lack of trying or wanting.
Oh yeah, and it's actually there's blueprints that survived, and the casemate extends somewhere up to here. It covers the engine deck partially. So in order to get to the engine for maintenance, which I would assume you would have to do a lot in a 66-ton tank, you would have to remove the gun, remove the casemate, disassemble partially the rear and the sides, and I can only imagine what maintenance that thing would have looked like.
So the gunner would basically sit on the engine. Yeah,
pretty much. If you've seen the Germans gave it some weird name, but it was like the 47 millimeter gun on the Renault 35 chassis, where the fighting compartment extends over the engine just because there isn't enough room. So like that, but scaled up a lot. Thankfully, that was not done. There was a compromise. Like you said, the ML20S gun was put on the KV-1S chassis. The Army grumbled about it. They still didn't give up on their dreams of BR2 or a B4 and an armored chassis, but that's what they had to deal with. And so there was this interesting development where I forget what game it was, but it was the same one that invented the E-79 German tank. It was like the IS-152, which does attempt to combine the IS-2 chassis in like a KV-2-esque big bulky turret with a 152 millimeter gun in it. The Red Army did not want this because, again, due to concrete penetration. It turned out that the concrete penetrating power of the 122 millimeter gun, so the A-19, was actually superior to that of the 152 millimeter ML20 because it had better muzzle velocity. And so even the ISU-122 tank destroyers, Soviet SPG doctrine was kind of very flexible. Tank destroyer wasn't really the word that they used, but ISU-122s were designed as tank destroyers, but these units were used in breakthroughs quite a lot because their guns had bigger range, higher rate of fire, higher concrete penetrating power. And so for an IS-2 tank, there was really no point in putting this gun howitzer in the turret, because even though the caliber is bigger, it can deliver more HE. That comes at a cost of range, at a cost of armor and concrete penetration, at a cost of rate of fire. And so the only, that's why the Red Army wanted the full range BR2 gun, is because it was superior to the A19 in every way. Well, aside from rate of fire, because you're still loading a full-size 152mm round into it. But yeah, unless you could fit that into a turret, which, I mean, the Americans put a 155mm gun into the T-30, so I'm sure, given unlimited resources, you could do the same thing in the IS-2. And if any alternate historians or skilled 3D modelers are watching this, I'm sure you could make some kind of alternate history turret. But given the constraints the Red Army was under in 1943, 44, 45, and its actual requirements for an armored vehicle, there wasn't really a point in continuing production of a KV-2 or setting up production of a KV-2-like vehicle on a superior chassis.
One question about the KV-2. I heard several times that the turret couldn't be turned if it was sitting on a slope or something, or was some. Is this true, or is this a myth?
So this is something that affects all tanks. Very rarely is the turret perfectly balanced, and so if your tank is tilted to some angle, it's going to start being harder and harder and harder to turn the turret until the strength of the traverse motor or your own physical strength is no longer enough to turn it, and in some cases even keep it in place. So it all depends on the slope. I don't have data for how big that slope would have been for the KV-2. That slope where it starts getting quite hard to turn the turret, even on tanks with smaller turrets, is not as big as you'd think. Something like 5 or 10, maybe not 5, but 10 degrees, 15 degrees, you're already seeing considerable difficulty. If you're using an electric traverse motor, very high spikes in current when you need to turn the turret. So, yeah, for any tank, such an angle exists. I can't tell you what it was for the KV-2.
But probably far lower due to the size and everything.
Oh yeah, for sure. At the end of the day, this was mobile artillery, right? And you want to fire from flat ground whenever possible.
So basically, the production was intended to stop in June 1941, and since the war broke out, they also didn't continue it because, like, on the say, okay, we need any tank now, so they didn't go with this one.
Yeah, there was no plans to continue it, and I think in this scenario where this was like a separate KV-2 factory, and that's all they built, that's all they could build, maybe production would continue. But the KV-2 was built the same factory as the KV-1, and might as well just build the KV-1.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.